This is our presentation on experimental film.
With it starting to gain traction in the 1920s and 30s with the Surrealism art movement, experimental film doesn't tell narrative in a traditional sense, as these films can often be lacking dialogue with its characters, easily understandable and digestible plot, or have no characters or plot at all. Whilst narrative film defines the commercial industry and documentary is more set on reality, experimental films are focused on cinematic techniques and visual expression within the editing, the filming, manipulation of the camera, or in the subject matter. The term was used to emphasize the way filmmakers experiment with the specific traditional elements of film for aesthetic expression or technical innovation. Instead of using these elements as they have previously been, experimental goes for the more avant-garde and artistic way of portraying the scene that best conveys the themes of the film.
Experimental filmmaking developed as a gateway for artistic, aesthetic, and expression. Experimental encapsulates a wide range of media, from non-narrative films to animation and video games. The definition of experimental film is one that does not adhere to the traditional film structure and is thus avant-garde. Ben will talk later in more depth about the modern experimental movement and how it has been influenced by the internet and various game consoles. The growing evolution of technology has opened new and exciting creative pathways to challenge audiences. Garden of Earthly Delights was done by pressing flowers into the film, and Fantasia by the Walt Disney Corporation included the work of over 1,000 animators and has been one of Disney's most complicated projects. With the invention of the camera, artists had to adapt to the creation of a different temporal media, and thus the artistic movement of modernism was born, as artists felt that the evolution of the camera could better capture reality than a painting, and so artists had to adapt to this, and art movements such as Cubism and Surrealism reflected this. However, postmodernism is a more self-aware and skeptical reflection of society, in the ways that modernism evolved from a reaction to the development in art. Postmodern continues in that path, and we can see more skeptical and critical reflection of society portrayed through a camera. Particularly, Andy Warhol eating a burger can be interpreted as a cynical critique of American hypercapitalism. Maya Deren, who Josh has talked about earlier, believed that the function of film was to create an experience, and to that end, experimental filmmakers succeed.
Maya Deren films Matches of the Afternoon. Maya Deren's Matches of the Afternoon is known as one of the most influential experimental films in American cinema. Deren's use of cinematic techniques focus on how it plays into the overall concept or theme of the film. As in Matches of the Afternoon, she creates this dreamlike feeling with the use of double exposure, slow motion, match cuts, jump cuts, and camera movement/angles. The double exposure is used to show her repeated selves with each other. Rapid jump cuts show her move in a stop motion type of way. The tilting and constant camera movement shows the world around her is unstable and not in interest with her. These techniques come together and are used in those non-traditional described ways to create a dreamlike concept and feel. In the short 14-minute runtime, it continues to grow a dizzy, disorienting, and avant-garde atmosphere that wasn't seen in commercial cinema during that time, or sometimes even now. With the film being experimental, the narrative goes for a different route, telling it in a repeated and circular sense of time, rather than a linear way. This is shown with the repetition of the sequence of the woman chasing a shadowy, mirror-faced figure along a street, entering a house, running up the stairs, and taking a key out of her mouth. Although it is in this repeated pattern, with each repetition of the event, there's slight changes or discoveries that allow the theme to grow. The use of visual language in place of linear narrative really stands out in this movie, as it's allowing the viewer to interpret it in different ways, as the message is more unclear than a more digestible traditional film. Maya Deren films Outland. Maya Deren again stars in this movie, playing a woman who is travelling through these dreamlike sequences. The film is quite similar to Matches of the Afternoon, with its themes of time and spaces joining together. There is a very clear use of match cuts throughout Outland. Normally, match cuts are used to show a character who is traveling through a believable distance, such as walking through a doorway into another room. However, in experimental films such as this one, the match cut is used in a more abstract and artistic way, her movement joining her between two very different areas that wouldn't logically be near each other. It shows her climbing up from a piece of driftwood onto an empty, desolate beach, then onto a dining hall table surrounded by many people. It then further uses the match cut while she's crawling onto the table, switching between her and some kind of jungle, then back to the table. This challenges the viewer's perception of the world the film is set in, as well as how these cuts have been used in more traditional narrative films before. A POV shot is typically a shot of what the character sees from their own eyes. It is used in a realistic sense compared to how it can be in experimental works that portray it more in illogical representations. The ending of the film shows the woman we've been following stealing a chess piece from some other people on the beach. As she is running away with it, we get shown a shot of Darren and the woman looking the way she is running, then back to a long shot of her continuing to flee the distance. This pattern is continued as we see the previous actions of Darren's character picking up rocks, on the table and on the driftwood, all looking at her, shown through POV long shots as she runs through these spaces again. This is similar to what we see in Meshes of the Afternoon, when there are multiple versions of the woman at the table. However, this time she uses a new technique of cutting from past actions to POV, instead of all the women in the same shot. It is communicating to us as if she is traveling back in time, emphasizing the more experimental use of these shots joined together to convey the concept of time and space.
The films of Maya Deren have had a profound effect on post-war independent film, and particularly the creation of a new form of American cinema, one which more profoundly highlighted a more personal, underground, and experimental kind of film. The most obvious example of her work's influence within popular culture can be seen with the works of David Lynch, who highlighted Meshes of the Afternoon as one of his favourite experimental films, and one whose influence can be seen throughout his work, particularly within his film Inland Empire. In 1986, the American Film Institute named their award for up-and-coming independent American filmmakers after her, the Maya Deren Award. As for the overall experimental film movement as a whole, influence has reverberated throughout the entire film and entertainment industry. Many stylistic conventions, particularly within cinematography and visuals, and especially within editing techniques, have been directly impacted on a large scale by these filmmaking pioneers. The entire art of the modern music video is highly reminiscent of the imagery and filmmaking style found within avant-garde cinema, and can be seen as a commercialization of the concepts found within such work. The non-linear editing and abstract imagery is matched with the music, much in the same way experimental silent films visuals are matched with the accompanying score. This type of imagery has also been incorporated into modern TV advertising, manipulating imagery in a similar way to convey emotions in the viewer. While the term experimental film is typically used in association with the old Hollywood directors and films contemporary to Maya Deren and her work, in reality the term can be used to describe any film which uses non-traditional filmic conventions to convey its meaning to the audience. The first place where this most prominently reared its head was in the rise of found footage filmmaking, particularly when it comes to horror, but not exclusively. While introduced to the mainstream with 1980's Cannibal Holocaust, it was first extensively popularized by the Blair Witch Project in 1999, which led to a rise in the first-person, non-linear format being used to immerse audiences in these unusual films, such as the likes of Cloverfield, Chronicle, and VHS. A film which explores this concept in a particularly meta way is 2009's Occult, a horror mockumentary film that uses its director and crew simultaneously behind the camera and as a part of its narrative. The film uses its heavily realist perspective to immerse and then disorient the audience with its unusual imagery and themes. Aside from this, there are still other forms of experimental film being made to this day. Traditional avant-garde filmmaking, however rarely, continues to be produced by some filmmakers to this day. From the works of David Lynch in his aforementioned Inland Empire, to more relatively recent works like View of the Neo, which tell its narrative entirely through a series of still photographs taken by the director in his real life over the course of a year. In more recent years, experimental filmmaking has taken the form of internet filmmakers uploading their short-form content through the likes of YouTube and Vimeo. This is being showcased through content the likes of Every Copy of Mario 64 is Personalized, The Backrooms, and This House Has People in It, all being produced at different levels, from independent companies like Adult Swim to young amateur students with no budget whatsoever. It can even be argued that experimental video games are essentially interactive films, using their format to deliver a narrative to the audiences in the same unique way. They typically contain more of the hallmarks of narrative and experimental film than they do games. Some examples of this can be seen with games like Until Dawn by Supermassive Games, What Remains of Edith Finch by Jan Sparrow, and The Stanley Parable by Davey Radin and William Pugh.